The 80-20 principle, how I learned to do less and achieve more. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed by your to-do list? Like you're running around all day, checking off tasks, and yet somehow not making progress on what really matters? That was totally me a couple of years ago. I was the king of busy, working 60-hour weeks, saying yes to every project, filling every minute of my calendar. I had this belief that if I just worked harder and did more, success would follow. But despite all that effort, I wasn't seeing the results I wanted, and I was burning myself out in the process. Then I stumbled across Richard Koch's book, The 80-20 Principle, and it completely transformed how I think about work, time, and pretty much everything else in my life. Today, I want to share how this deceptively simple concept changed my approach to, well, almost everything, and how it might help you reclaim your time and focus on what actually matters. So what exactly is this 80-20 principle? Also known as Pareto principle, it's the observation that roughly 80% of results come from just 20% of causes. Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto first noticed this pattern when he realized that about 80% of the land in Italy was owned by only 20% of the population. Richard Koch took this idea and showed how it applies to virtually everything in life. Some examples. 80% of a company's profits typically come from 20% of its product. 80% of your happiness might come from 20% of the people in your life. 80% of your productivity likely comes from 20% of your work hours. The ratios aren't always exactly 80-20. Sometimes it's 70-30 or even 95-5. But the point is that there's almost always a minority of inputs creating a majority of outputs. And this imbalance is actually the natural order of things, not an anomaly. What Koch does brilliantly in this book is show that it isn't just a cute observation. It's a powerful lever for transformation. By identifying the vital 20% in any area of your life and doubling down on it, you can dramatically increase your results while potentially doing less work. The book breaks down how to apply this thinking to business, personal productivity, relationships, happiness, and more. Koch argues that most of us are trapped in some other kind of thinking. The assumption that inputs and outputs are balanced, that all customers are equally valuable, that every hour of work produces the same results, and that every activity deserves equal time. One concept that really stuck with me was what Koch calls the 80-20 analysis, the practice of regularly examining your life to identify which small inputs are creating your biggest results. This isn't a one-time exercise, but an ongoing mindset shift. Another key idea is positive and negative simplicity. Positive simplicity means focusing intensely on the few things that create exceptional value. Negative simplicity means systematically eliminating or reducing low-value activities that consume your time and energy. When I first encountered these ideas, I had this uncomfortable realization that I was squandering most of my time and energy on low-impact activities. I was treating all tasks as equally important, which meant I was giving my peak hours and best focus to stuff that honestly didn't move the needle much. I decided to apply the 80-20 analysis to my work life, and the results were eye-opening. I discovered that about 75% of my income came from just 3 clients, yet I was spreading my attention equally across all 12. Even more shocking, I realized that almost all my best ideas and most productive work happened during a specific 2-hour window in the morning. Yet I was trying to distribute my thinking work throughout the entire day. The part that really challenged me was Koch's suggestion to deliberately neglect or eliminate low-value activities. As a recovering perfectionist, the idea of intentionally doing certain things at a good enough level or not doing them at all was very uncomfortable. But I could see how this strategic neglect was exactly what I needed. I also saw how the principle applied beyond work. Looking at my spending, I realized that a small percentage of my purchases brought me the vast majority of my enjoyment. In relationships, it became clear that a handful of people were responsible for most of the joy and growth in my life. Yet I was distributing my social energy as if all relationships were equally important. And the most confronting part was admitting that my busyness had become a form of procrastination, a way to avoid focusing on the small number of difficult but high impact activities that would actually move my life forward. After digesting the 80-20 principle, I made some pretty dramatic changes to my work and life. Here's what I actually implemented. First, I did a complete audit of my business. I identified my top 3 clients and deepened those relationships, creating more value for them and, in turn, more stable income for me. For my lower value clients, I either referred them to colleagues who were a better fit or raised my rate to make the time investment working with them worthwhile. I completely restructured my daily schedule around my personal magic hours. That 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. window when my brain is firing on all cylinders. Now that time is sacred for my most creative and complex work. No emails, no calls, no admin tasks during those hours. I created what I call my vital few list, the 3 to 5 projects or activities that will create 80% of my success this quarter. This list stays visible on my desk and I check in with it daily to make sure I'm allocating my best time and energy to these priorities. I also applied the principle to my digital life. I unsubscribed from about 80% of the newsletters and content I was consuming, keeping only the few sources that consistently provided breakthrough ideas. I turned off notifications for most apps and set up office hours for email and messaging. The results have been pretty dramatic. Within 6 months of implementing these changes, my income increased by about 40%, while my working hours decreased by almost 15%. I have more white space in my calendar, more mental bandwidth for creative thinking, and honestly, much less stress. The biggest surprise, though, was how this principle created a virtuous cycle. By focusing on my highest leverage activities, I got better results, which gave me more confidence to continue doubling down on what works and eliminating what doesn't. Don't get me wrong, I still catch myself sliding back into the more is better mindset sometimes. But now I have a framework for recognizing when I'm spreading myself too thin and a strategy for recalibrating. Pause and reflect for a minute. As you think about how the 80-20 principle might apply in your own life, here are some questions. If you analyzed your work right now, which 20% of your activities would you guess create 80% of your results or value? How might you schedule change if you double down on those activities? What are the trivial many tasks that consume a disproportionate amount of your time relative to the results they produce? Which of these could you eliminate, delegate, or drastically simplify? When during the day or week are you at your best? Are you currently using those peak hours for your highest impact work, or are they being consumed by low value activities? In your personal life, which 20% of your possessions, activities, or relationships bring you 80% of your happiness? How could you allocate more resources, time, money, energy, to these vital few? What's one small 80-20 experiment you could try this week? Perhaps protecting your 2 most productive hours each day, or focusing intensely on your single highest impact project. Remember, the goal isn't to get the ratios exactly right. It's to recognize and leverage the natural imbalance between inputs and outputs. By focusing on the vital few and being strategic about the trivial many, you can create extraordinary results without extraordinary effort. That's the real magic of the 80-20 principle.